We are so lucky, number one, to be alive at our advanced age.
That's true.
Number two, to have beautiful, brilliant sunshine on the 10th day of October 2008. And number three, to be in God's country out here on Cumberland Head with Frank Pabst, the old captain. How are you?
I'm doing great, Gordy. When you got a place like this and you wake up in the morning at these beautiful surroundings, how can you not be doing great?
This is a fur piece from Miller Street, isn't it?
Yep, sure is.
You lived there for how long?
48 years. And collected so much stuff.
Boy, does that sound familiar.
14 rooms chock full.
How could you possibly move? I think about that with dread. If I ever had to move, or as happens to senior citizens like you and me, if we had to downsize, I would OD try to figure out what to keep and what to toss.
Many treasures have gone over the mountains, believe me. I wound up buying a truck, getting some friends, moved what I could keep, and took about 6 loads down to Steve Brody's auction gallery.
Did you really?
Oh yeah.
Oh boy.
And then I sold the truck that I bought to move for more than I paid for it. So that's a good deal.
That's a good deal.
Yeah, but
you have been so many places and done so many things. You've been an integral part of the growth in this North Country. For well, what's the first day you ever came to Clinton County or Essex County? 1940 something.
49, yeah.
1949.
I come up with a crew to put a roof on the chapel at Dannemora Prison. I was working as a steeplejack then.
I forgot that. One more thing on that. One more check mark.
And then after I come back from the military, from Korea, I had a driving taxi in the city, had an incident down there that kind of soured me on New York City, and come up here to visit a relative that had a bed and breakfast down in E-Town, and just loved the place. I mean, it was in the middle of December, it was 10 below zero, and a great spot to be. And I moved up here.
Isn't that amazing? Now this connection with E-Town has always been interesting to me, because I didn't know until 35 or 40 years later that our good dear friend, the late lamented Art Pierce's last partner, Blanche, she was the one that ran that place, right?
Yeah, Blanche and Abbott Bradford. She was married to a George McQueen back in New York City, and they divorced. And George's son, George, was my best buddy. He went in the Marines, and I was in the Army over in Korea. But prior to that, we were hanging out all the time. We used to hustle newspapers. George had a 41 Pontiac convertible. We'd get down to Jamaica Station, and we'd buy the New York News for a penny a copy, and it was selling for 2 cents a copy on the stands. And we'd go out to the bars in Queens, and we'd sell a paper for a dime, a quarter. Depends on how much we were able to fumble to get the change up for the quarter when somebody gave us a quarter. But I was a kid, and I was making good money with that.
Isn't that amazing? I have to, this is an aside, but you and I are going to talk about Georgia because our friend Wayne B.A. moved down there. But in my recent trip to Georgia, around Atlanta and other towns, I'd look over and there would be a kid on the corner selling newspapers when people were going home from work at night. And cars would stop at a red light, and he'd run over and give them a paper, and they'd give him the money through the window and take off.
Now, there's a classic example of an American entrepreneur. The only problem is going to be as he advances in age and he decides to put those entrepreneurial skills to starting a business, and realizes that now he's got to get permits, permission, rules, regulations, and it's going to take him 2 years to get where he's got to start making money. And nobody's got a bankroll to back that up anymore. We have legislated ourselves out of business.
When you made your first 5 cents, and when I made mine, it was a simpler time.
It certainly was.
And I'm not always sure that those were the good old days, because we had to struggle through, but there was less regulation, wasn't there?
It certainly was.
Yeah,
it certainly
amazing.
was. When just a classic example, when I started the Juniper, there were no rules pertaining to serving food on a boat in the state of New York.
No, come on.
Really, there was nothing. There was only 10 operations in the state of New York that were doing boat tours. So I wrote an operations plan, and I took it to the Clinton County Board of Health. They looked it over, and he said, well, it looks good. I said, okay, you come down and monitor me while I'm doing it, and tell me if I'm doing anything wrong. And I started an operation. Nowadays, it's, you just can't do it that way anymore.
It would boggle your mind now
Yes,
to
it
see
would.
the rules and regulations. So you came up here, and what did you actually do for a living when you first moved up here?
Raked leaves in Elizabethtown and drove a mail truck.
Did you really?
Yeah, then I went to work for Johnson Chevrolet down in E-Town as a mechanic.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Always had mechanical skills, and I took a little bit of mechanics in high school, a little bit of high school I was in. And then I met my wife. Well, she wasn't my wife then, but I intended her to be. And she moved to Plattsburgh to go to college, and I come up here so I could be with her. Got a job delivering fuel oil for the old Calso Oil Company.
Oh my goodness, I haven't even heard that name in 40 years.
Turned into
Chevron
goodness. Fuels later on.
Yeah.
And got a job from delivering oil to peddling ice cream for Seal Test Ice Cream. And the manager there, Mr. Bob Hughes, was probably one of the greatest men that I've run across. He taught me more about being a human being than I think any experience in my life. Just compassionate, understanding, great guy, and I miss him dearly. He was a good friend.
I do a lot of emailing every day back and forth to friends of mine who used to live here and some who wish they could come back. And that's what you talk about. The teachers and the individuals who had an impact on your life. You start with your parents and you work your way out and you realize that some of these individuals had as much of an impact on your life as your own parents did.
Yeah.
Isn't that incredible?
It's absolutely amazing.
We paused for a moment because somebody dropped by to say hello and ask about a neighbor.
That's
Frank spilled coffee all over his thing. He said, that's my trademark. If you knew how many cups of coffee I have spilled over the years, at 30 cups a day for all those years I worked on the radio, some of them went down me and some of them went in equipment and some of them on the records and oh my.
I was going to say, what's that funny noise? It's when you dump a cup of coffee into the audio board at the radio
Oh, that would do it. So you've been around here for a long time. Captain Frank, as I call him, has been a friend of mine for well over 40 years. We used to talk when I was on the radio. He would call up and we'd chat every now and again. I think it was supposed to be a 1-minute commercial, but we kind of went over like the guys in the political conventions do. Go over the time limit a little bit. Nobody seemed to mind, did they? Huh?
Well, we didn't just do a commercial. We did a lot of general information about what was going on, and the commercial was kind of squeezed into the middle of it.
That's kind of like what Calvin and I do from time to time. Every now and again, there's a little commercial stuck in the middle there, right?
Well, again, it's the thing that keeps the business going, and when business keeps going, we all make money.
The interesting thing I found about you, Frank Pabst, is that you've always had an opinion on things. Was that something you developed? Right? Now, you were born where in the city? Right in the
Brooklyn.
city? Right in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Now, that was an age where you had to have an opinion to survive.
Yeah, I had an opinion a pair of fists.
Otherwise, the garbage trucks and the neighbor kids would run you down. So
Yep, that's
you
a
had to
fact.
have an opinion, and you had to fight for what was yours, and everything you got, you had to scrounge for. But that's been kind of the story of your life, too.
It's also been interesting. I love challenges. I love doing something that a little unusual, that not everybody does. And it gives me pleasure. It gives me psychological pleasure to be able to look at a situation and figure out an answer to it.
I've always said that Frank Pabst was just about one step ahead of the crowd. And because your thinking was a little bit ahead of the curve each time, you were more often misunderstood than understood. Did you ever have that feeling?
Yeah, quite often. And one of the best or worst times or examples of that, when I was with Channel 5 Television, I was a sales manager, and I had been in different areas around the state, and I saw how they were handling their downtown. And Channel 5 had a membership in the Downtown Merchants Association, and I went to them and I said, look, you've got these malls popping up all over the place, and in order to hold your base, why don't you close down downtown Plattsburgh to vehicular traffic from Friday afternoon, 5 o'clock Friday, until closing time on Saturday, and have the city put out benches in the middle of the road, potted plants, something they can put in and take out with one truckload. Oh, no, we got to have the cars going through here. Can't do it. Okay, they couldn't do it. Burlington, Vermont does specifically that, except they do it all the time. It's a closed downtown area, a closed mall, and it just got awarded one of the best places in the United States. So there was an idea that I offered to them years ago, and
well, that's happened so many times.
Yes,
and
it has.
For one reason or another, occasionally one of your great ideas was adopted and you weren't given credit for it. But sometimes you were.
Well, the reality of seeing it come into fruition is credit enough.
Yeah. But you've to have an opinion is like casting a vote. You know, we're doing this in one of the most contentious presidential campaigns that I've ever seen in my lifetime, and I voted in lots of them ever since I was first eligible to vote. I don't think I ever missed voting when I had the opportunity, and I thought it was my right and my obligation and my extreme pleasure to be able to have that one little part in the future of my country. And I think that's important for us, even in this area. Even if we don't run for politics, at least you can express your
That's
opinion.
true.
And you've done that in so many cases, not only with Plattsburgh and Clinton County and New York State, in your beloved Lake Champlain has been near and dear to your heart. And that's a topic we can discuss, because you've been somehow, I guess fate meant to connect you with water from the time
That's
you were
true.
a small child. When did this great passion, how did that develop with you?
I lived, after we left Brooklyn, we went out to College Point, which is just basically almost under the Whitestone Bridge on the Queens side. And it's on the East River. And it was 1939, and it was a shipyard behind my house for Bushy's shipyard. And Ira Bushy was a boat builder and owned a fleet of tugboats, owned a fleet of self-propelled tankers that would take the sludge that was College Point's pride and joy, was the Talman Island sewer plant. All New York sewage would run down there. They'd pump it out and take it out to sea and dump it out to sea, which back in those days was acceptable. I wound up, was when the Second World War come along, anybody that could walk could get a job. I was 11 years old, and I was an oiler on a steam tug. Well, oil is an easy job. You go around an oil can, you fill the reservoirs.
11 years old?
Yeah.
Think about that.
Made some good money, and that kind of got me interested in making money. It was great. I wound up going on the diesel tugs. I wound up doing a trip up to Greenland with them, and then I just kind of followed along. When I got up here, I was interested in the water, interested in the history, and I never was much of a student, but when I found out, the first cannonball I found and held this inanimate piece of iron in my hand, and realized that 200 years before, the last hand to touch this was an American sailor, and the country was struggling for its existence. It was the psychological rush that I got from that was just a brand that stayed with me forever.
You know, that's one of the reasons you and I have remained fast friends, because of our great interest and passion for history.
Yeah.
And I've always felt it sad that I couldn't engender or inspire that passion in more people. You and I talked about this way when we were both a lot younger, and these bellies looked a lot different than they do now. Compare these two. But in those days, we couldn't understand why people wouldn't get involved in local history.
Yep.
We talked about it often, on and off the radio. Why don't we try to inspire people to come here just because this is a fabulous place with its role in history, which now we're finally starting to talk about?
You know, it's interesting. I was at a meeting the other day, and Celine Paquette, who's doing a fabulous job of trying to coordinate 2009, the 400th quadricentennial celebration, and the fact that one of the dreams that I had was a place where the history can be shown, where the school children can see it. And I've got 2 points here. We're talking about the weather wax. Well, the weather wax cost taxpayers in the state of New York $250,000.
Explain to people what the weather wax is.
Because the weather wax was built to Coast Guard specifications to transport passengers, and it's a replica of an 1820 sail ferry. Back in those days, before the bridges were across the lake, they could bring a team of horses and a wagon up on this ferry. The mast was set off to the side. They'd hoist the sail, sail across the lake, and the team of horses could go down the other side of the boat, down the other ramp. Then they just swung the sail around and sailed it back the other way. It was omnidirectional. Well, it was built as a replica. It was very expensive to build. It was tied up in a marina where the wind got to it, and it bore a 3-foot hole in the planks of this boat, and it's planked with 1.25 inch thick wood.
Unbelievable.
3-foot hole. You could crawl into the bow of the boat. John Rock found out about it, got a hold of Transportation Museum, got a hold of the mayor, and John gets things going. Well, John got
How
this
well
going.
we know. Those are people who've watched this program know John Rock gets things going.
Indeed. Well, we got the boat through a lot of machinations. We got the boat over to the New York side. The Essex County brought it up on a tractor trailer. Pratt Whitney gave us space in their hangar. Roger Harwood, John Rock, Rupert Dagnaw, and myself worked probably 150 hours, and all kinds of obstacles. That's a story unto itself, the weather wax.
It sure is, yeah.
We got it put back together. I called the Coast Guard, and they were told that the boat was going into a museum, so they figured it was going to be a static display. End product being that it was off their register. So I had to do a cold start with Coast Guard. We got it registered, got it approved. We transported about $3,000 worth of passengers the first year, $6,000 the second year. I got into a bit of a discussion with the director of the museum, and it was just not a fruitful discussion, and I headed off into the sunset. The boat has been out of the water for 2 years now. It should be transporting people to Crab Island and to Valcour Island. The taxpayers paid for it. Why isn't it working? And we need it. The other thing is that down in Albany, the New York State Museum owns a boat called the Day Peckinpah. The Day Peckinpah.
That's a new one on me.
It was built in 1925 to transport bulk cement from the cement plant on the Hudson River to various parts of the Great Lakes, and it's 190 foot long, 40 feet wide. The main hold is 35 feet wide and 135 feet long. Well, the boat now there's no use for it, and I said, what a fantastic floating classroom this would make.
Wow.
Take every historian that has a town bordering the lake and have them put an easel up with the history of their town. Bring the boat up here next May, run it in all the ports, Vermont side and New York side, because this quadricentennial is
Oh, of course.
both states. Bring the boat up, have the school children get an opportunity to see all this. The other fact is that I'm with the Lake Champlain Advisory Council. One of our concerns is invasive species coming in the lake by not proper procedures done for fishermen to take the boat from this pond, go into that pond. We could have an environmental display in that boat that the young people could be taught how to do it right at a right age. I mean, after you're older and you establish your patterns, it's kind of hard to change them. But if we can get them when they're young and teach them how to do it right, we're going to be heading off problems that would come to haunt us in 2050 and 2075. So I'm hoping both these, I hope the weather wax gets back in service for 2009, and I hope that the Day Peckinpah becomes a reality. Selena's aware of it, she's working on it, and I just do everything I can to try to encourage
Have
her.
you seen the boat?
Oh yeah, I've been on it. Got a pair of 610 Jimmy Diesels in it. Engineer's a good fella. Drinks a beer every now and then.
Oh, you can't hold that against him.
No.
Well,
Matter of fact, I had one of his beers.
You and I have shared a few of those down through the years, and that's
God.
probably an aspect of our life that we won't be spending much time with today. Tell me that boat is seaworthy now?
Yeah. Go down there, hit the starters, and away she goes.
Come on.
One of the members of our committee is trying to get a donation of fuel. If they could get a fuel donation to bring the boat up, probably 1,000 gallons, which is, $4,000 worth of diesel fuel. But if she could get a donation like that, I'm pretty sure that would ease the problems to bring the boat up on Lake Champlain.
Where would you moor it?
You would moor at various points around the lake.
A home. You'd have to have a home spot for it.
We'd start the exhibits in Whitehall. We'd go to Orwell, go to Thompson's Point, Burlington, St. Albans, Rouse's Point, Shazy Landing, Plattsburgh, Wilcox's Dock, Port Kent, Willsboro, Essex, Westport, Port Henry, and so on down the lake.
I have embraced and espoused a lot of your schemes over the years, and have seen some of them come to fruition and some of them kicked like a football out onto Lake Champlain. This one sounds like a worthy one, although to make classrooms on this boat, it would take quite a bit of money, wouldn't it?
Well, no, you take the whole main hold as one open area with easels for the history and a docents, 1, 2, or 3 docents to bring the class around and cover the whole thing.
Would you have to paint the outside of it to make it look decent?
It doesn't look too bad, but then again, my opinion on it.
And my eyesight is failing.
I didn't think my boatyard looked too bad, but everybody else did.
Well, but what a wonderful idea. What's the name of this boat?
Day Peckinpah, and it's owned by the New York State
somebody
Museum.
Or Day Peckinpah?
I don't know.
It's probably a name I'll never forget because it's so odd, but I will follow that story, and you must let us know if there's any progress. Celine liked the idea.
She liked the idea. She thinks it's a good idea, but she's got a lot of things on her dinner plate.
Well, there are a lot of things on everybody's dinner plate. Calvin and I did a nice show with Celine. We've followed her careers plural, for many years. We know what obstacles she faces. Now we're the financial situation in dire straits for our nation and many other countries in the world because of it. It's difficult to know where monies would come from to fund something like this. But if we don't instill that love for our area and for history in the kids now, where is the country going to be when you and I are gone?
Well, that's the fact. In 1908, when we did the celebration, we built the monument on Crab Island. The Champlain Monument, the lighthouse down at Crown Point. These were all dedicated in 1908, part of the lake celebration. And what are we going to do this time? I mean, they spent a lot of money before, but I don't think we can do anything of that magnitude. But if we can just do something that will get the children's attention, that they'll know that we tried. I did a lecture, talk, speech, whatever you want to call it, to about 40 school teachers on how to inspire young people with the history. I started my talk off by bringing one of my cannonballs in and handing it out, and it passed around the room. I said, "Now realize this: your hands have touched a piece of the United States history." And again with the 200 years ago, American sailor. And then went on, and I talked for an hour and 45 minutes. Hard to believe I could do that, but nonetheless, they were patient, they listened, and I got good response out of the group. And it's a matter of dealing with the young people and getting them excited about the history. I mean, this is such a great area. The other thing we now have 3 museums that exist. They're there. That was one of my dreams. I remember talking to Chris Ortloff about it.
You and I have talked about it so many times, dreaming long before the base ever closed that we could have a campus area with the several museums so that we would be a tourist destination.
Well, I spent probably $5,000 on going to bus tours trying to convince them we were a destination. when we had the Weatherwax working with the Transportation Museum, we had the makings of a destination. Millions of people go to Gettysburg to go across the field that's got some rocks in it, a place where we were fighting with ourselves. Here we were fighting for our survival, and it's just so close, and now it's fractured a little bit without the Weatherwax being in service. But at that time, the people could go through the Battle of Plattsburgh Association. Half the group would go there, the other half would come on a Weatherwax. We'd take them over to the island, give them the history of the island, trade the groups, and there were a group of school children that learned what happened on Crab Island, the significance of it, and the fact that because of Crab Island and what happened there, we are a country.
Through modern technology, hopefully this interview that we're doing on this beautiful October day, on the 10th day of October, on Cumberland Head near Plattsburgh, with this fabulous backdrop here.
You want to see it when the sun sets.
Oh my goodness. Sunrise and sunsets are beautiful, and you and I have seen so many. And we hope we can inspire people to think about this North Country and come and visit us. We wouldn't mind people coming into this area and say, hey Frank, what is this all about? I want to tell you, for those people who might have just turned their TVs on or fired up their computers to watch this show on the internet, that we're talking with one of my dearest, oldest friends, Captain Frank Pabst on Cumberland Head, and the stories that this man can tell on camera and off camera are interesting and multifarious. Let's go back to when you first got your pilot's license. How did that transpire?
I had the idea to do the Juniper and knew I needed a captain's license. And
now the Juniper, bear in mind, some people are watching this for the very first time. The Juniper was a tour boat.
Yeah, she was my iron mistress, the only competition my wife had. Juniper was 65 feet long, 85 tons, seated 110 people. We'd serve steak, swordfish, salmon, and chicken grilled on open flame out at the island.
Oh yeah,
beautiful sunsets, dancing. It was a fabulous boat, and it worked for Plattsburgh. If we had a group going out, and my price was X, and they only had 3/4 X, maybe a little less food, maybe a little less time, but I got the group to go out. I'd rather have 3/4 of something than zero of nothing, and it was a good thing. I did it for 25 years. We took school children out. We gave them a complete history lesson of on site. This is where it happened. Right where the X on the water is where the battle took place. And by being able to identify it to a geographical point, it registered with the children. They grasped it, and I've got packets of drawings that the teachers would have the kids do a drawing and send me the packet of what was their impression.
Doesn't that make it worthwhile? Don't you love that?
It does.
And those are kids who are now adults,
yep,
and hopefully doing the same thing with their offspring and other people. Some are teachers, some are educators. That's a great thing. So, your pilot's license.
We're down and took the test. Of course, I've had a lot of experience on boats. I ran a sheriff's department on the lake for a number of years.
That's true.
So I had my time on the water, and I took the test and I aced it.
What year was this?
1976.
No kidding.
Yep. We bought the boat in '76, and I took my test in '76 along with Jerry Chapman, who was my engineer when I bought the boat, and he knew all the intricacies of it because he used to work for the ferry company. And the generator that was in the Juniper when I bought it was the one that used to be on the old ferry Roosevelt that Jerry worked on 40 years before.
But once again, Frank, the Juniper was a great idea, in some cases ahead of its time, and you battled to keep that thing going.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a dream venture for you for 25 years.
Well, I'd drive tractor trailer in the winter months. I'd work for Keogh Transportation on the tugs in the winter months in the off season. I had to work all year round. I didn't get much time off. And then I had a trucking company and a restaurant and a seafood store and oh my God, the list of things, my scuba shop. Those all things were entrepreneurial efforts that it didn't pay off well, but it paid off. I'm surviving.
Well, here we are.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
So it was
It's-
an interesting time, a wonderful time, and I just don't suppose you've ever added up how many people enjoyed the Juniper over the years, but it's thousands and thousands of people from this area and visitors to this area.
we would average 10 to 15,000 people a summer
Think
on the
about
Juniper.
it. Think about it.
Yep.
And I have to say that at some point in time, they brought another tour ship in here from across the lake in Vermont that wasn't successful for various reasons. And so, as far as I know, when we're doing this program with Captain Frank on October 10th, 2008, there is no similar craft operating out of Plattsburgh.
No, there isn't. Now, it's kind of interesting. I had a couple people talking to me, and they said, "Could you find another boat?" And sure. There's one down in Schuylerville. 2671 GM diesel, steel hull, fake paddle wheel, double deck, all a kit and caboodle. The guy's asking 165. I'll bet you if I went down there with 135, I could drive it away. And there's a few people talking about trying to put up the money for it. I don't think I've got the wherewithal to do what I did when I was 45 years old.
No kidding. Is that the first admission you're going to make?
Well, mentally I have it, but physically
yeah.
I just don't have the endurance I used to
Yeah,
have.
well, that's true.
But,
we're two peas in a pod sitting here,
I could certainly
But you could,
give advice,
yeah.
be a consultant, make it work. I know how to make it work, and we need it. Our area is so rich in history, and it's our heritage.
Yeah.
And we haven't done awfully well with it up until I guess it was around '96. I think, and I correct me if you think I'm wrong. The recovery of the anchor from the confiance was the pivotal point of this historical renaissance we're enjoying now.
I got to stop right here because we were just talking about this with many friends, and one of our programs has recently been placed on the internet about the raising of the confiance or the confiance anchor.
You are fancy.
But I will never forget the excitement that I almost shut the radio station off and took off when Frank calls me and said, "Guess what we just brought out of Lake Champlain." When the heck was that anyway?
I think it was '96 when we first found it. And I wanted to make sure. I've seen so much of Plattsburgh's history leave Plattsburgh.
Yeah.
Over in Virginians, going across the border, what have you. I wanted to make sure we kept it. So I figured if we made a big enough stink about it, that there would be enough public opinion that we keep it. Reality, we've still got the anchor. It's at City Hall. Soon it will be going down to the Battle of Plattsburgh where it belongs. And that is what I wanted to have happen.
I want to tell people how important a find this was. This is the anchor from the British flagship Confiance or Confiance that played a critical role in the Battle of Plattsburgh, right out here behind us.
Yep.
On September,
Right over yonder.
On September 11th, 1814. And of all the time, I say we, because I've been a collective part of promoting this history and talking about it with people like you and other experts. It's been a long time trying to decide exactly how this battle took place, how these ships were placed during the battle time, and to imagine that all those years later, some of your friends and mine, including you, would actually pinpoint that anchor. And if I was that excited when I went down taking still photographs before Calvin and I ever thought about doing this program on Hometown Cable, how excited you must have been when that thing finally breached the surface.
It was incredible. And the first raising of the anchor, I went out with a 40-foot steel barge that maybe stuck a foot out of the water with a donkey engine and a winch. And sent a diver down. He secured a hoist line to it. The anchor was drove in the bottom of the lake about 5 feet into the mud. So I had about 6 guys on the barge, and probably 4 of them were your size and my size. And took the donkey engine and cranked it down, and gradually the bow of the barge goes underwater.
I'm laughing. It's not funny.
The back end of the barge,
Oh, golly.
there's about a foot and 2 foot of the back end of the barge over the water.
Say, okay, what's
So I said,
next?
okay, movable ballast. All you guys get up on the other end of the boat. So we get up on the other end of the boat,
Lord,
and
Lord.
it ain't moving. I said, all right, guys, we're going to have to do like ballet, coordinated jumping. So here in the middle of the lake, you've got 6 grown men jumping
where
in
was
unison.
Calvin with the camera that day?
It would have been priceless.
Oh, my.
But you got 6 grown men jumping on this boat. Well, a shock transmitting down the cable gradually shook the mud.
You got to be kidding.
And all of a sudden, the
Whose
bow...
genius idea was that to start jumping up and
Wow.
down? Oh, I can't. I've never heard that part of the story
It was
before.
hysterical.
Oh, my God.
And when I cranked her down again, and we jumped again, and we kept seesawing on
Oh,
this
dear
until finally
Lord.
the anchor broke surface. I brought it into shore, and of course we let the word out, and we had it on display down there with a hose on it.
By then, had the guys underwater, had you dived on it yourself?
No, I did not.
But the other boys did.
Kenny Van Stockham.
Yeah.
And I forget, I think, it was probably Ken that went down and hooked it up the first time.
But had he already seen the writing on it? Did anybody know
No.
by the time you brought
No.
it up what it was?
Not until we hosed it off.
So
And
you
when
didn't
when we
know.
hosed it off, we surmised by location, weight, et cetera, that's where it came from. Now, interesting point. The anchor showed up on a sub-bottom penetrating sonar that we had on a tug. We just put this new sonar on a tug. And it looks in a cone ahead of the tug, and it also looks directly under the tug. And the pattern under the tug will show you water, mud, rock, and it will penetrate up to 10 feet in the mud.
Oh.
So Bill Curry, my partner, is out there with the tug, and he saw the anchor on the sonar. And he took the GPS reading of it. We told Kenny Van Stockham about it, or Bill Van Stockham. They were getting ready to go diving. I said, just swing by this GPS spot and see what you hit.
See what we got.
He goes back in. There's a big wooden cross thing with a big iron thing driven on the bottom of the lake.
What does that mean, Frank? Oh.
Well, anyway,
my.
we managed to get it up, and then we were like the dog chasing a car. Okay, you caught me. What are you going to do with me? So it was decided. Then New York State got into it, and legalities back and forth. Put it back where it came from. It was safe there for 200 years.
So, but you had it on shore,
Yeah,
right by your spot down there at the end.
yeah.
of
It was on display
the
for about a week when it was decided to put it back where it
But
came
you were
from.
smart enough to cover it with burlap and keep the water on it.
Oh, yeah.
And you knew that it had to be kept wet for a while.
I've got basic conservation skills, perhaps not perfected to those that have a lot of initials after their name, but I wasn't going to allow anything to happen to hurt it. It distresses me a little bit, and I've talked with Keith Herklow about it. He saw a similar anchor down in Portsmouth or Baltimore, Annapolis. And the anchor is about the same period of time, and it's sitting outside, and he asked one of the docents down there, what about that anchor? What did you do to conserve it? Did you see that sailor over there with the paintbrush? Every year he paints it. We spent, well, the initial price, the requested price was $50,000 to conserve the anchor. But Art Cohen generously picked up $25,000 of himself. We paid him $25,000 to conserve the anchor. And they've done a procedure to it, and it's more complicated than I can understand. It looks like it was painted with black enamel. The procedure they did caused it to turn black, and it's supposed to preserve it forevermore because there's some kind of bacteria that eats anchors. But anyway, anything I've ever taken out of the lake, put a coat of oil on it, it lasts forever. But this procedure, everything was it. What it did do, though, it clouded some of the writing on it. Back in 1813, when the anchor was made, they had taken with white lead paint and wrote Quebec, which is where it was going to, and the weight of the anchor on the other fluke. And then the weight of the anchor is stamped into the shaft of the anchor.
Now we're talking, just for the people who have no idea what this history means, we'll try to explain a little bit. This was a pretty good sized boat, pretty good sized ship.
Yeah.
This Confiance,
187 feet long, 800 tons, 300 fighting men, 36 long cannon.
So now we're talking about a big anchor. This is not just a little,
3,400 pounds.
yeah. That's why they're jumping up and down, trying to suck it out of the mud. Oh, what a great story. That was worth coming out here today. And we never talked about another thing.
Well,
anyway, the anchor was conserved.
Yeah.
They brought it back, and they installed it in City Hall. That was a project all by itself, getting it in there.
Yes, it was.
As we well know. We were there that day, right, Calvin? With hometown cable cameras trying to get the doors in the front and get it up and get the... It's a miracle that people lived through all of those projects, but they got it installed in City Hall. But that isn't... This is a segment of Frank's life that to me is the most exciting of all. Because back in the old days when Frank and I first started to talk, we talked about going down and actually touching those pieces of history under Lake Champlain. And you were always interested in seeing what was down there.
Yep.
And so you started scuba diving. When did you learn to scuba dive?
Well, one of the jobs I had in the city was a helper and it was in a hard hat rig down in Bayonne, New Jersey, for Mayor Chapman and Scott. And I worked with a hard hat diver. I did one scuba dive down in Florida, and then I did another one over in Okinawa when I was in the Army. And I kind of self-taught on the diving. I knew enough about the hard hat work to know about decompression and stuff like that. Did some reading, got my certification, certified instructor. I was instructor number 7.
Come on.
I'm serious. I still got the card.
You were number... No, we're talking about early days.
Oh, yeah. This is back in the 50s.
The late Jacques Cousteau, who invented the aqualung, not that many years before that, actually.
That's true.
So that when you started to dive with tanks, it was a pretty elementary, rudimentary design,
I
right?
started off with Jack Farrell and Stub Longwear from Elizabethtown, and they're the ones that harvested the rudder off of the steamer Champlain that sat down in Essex for so many years, and that's another story. But then Hector Sandberg was my diving partner up here, and Ed Sustorf, who's down in Port Kent, has a float plane. And Ed would fly over the shallows, and if he saw an anomaly in the shallows, he'd mark it, come back and tell Hector. Hector and I go out and dive it. So we found wrecks that not too many people knew were there. The point with that anchor, though, is when that anchor was lost, the confiance would put out 4 anchors, and then by tightening and loosening the lines, it would aim the broadsides of the confiance. Both bow anchors were shot off by Commodore McDonough on the Saratoga. The opening salvo shot the anchors off. With no bow anchors, the boat was left like a one-armed boxer. That anchor is the reason why we're a country. Had they not lost that anchor, had that shot not hit it, and you can see the impact marks on the anchor, we might not have been the country we are today. 200 yards from where the anchor was originally found, our sonar shows us a debris field, 60 feet by 200 feet. In that debris field, I suspect we're going to see muskets and cannons that we can rinse off and fire, because there's no deterioration under the mud. There's no oxygen, no oxidization. Everything is like brand new.
That's exciting, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah.
So what's the theory now about... So let's go back in time. I hate to keep jumping around, but you got your license. You became a certified instructor. You started a club called the Lake Champlain Rec Raiders.
Lake Champlain Underwater Historical Research Club.
Oh, okay.
Except after one day we couldn't remember the name.
So it became the Rec Raiders?
Yes.
And you had a nice group of people who did some serious diving down here.
Yep. I worked for the Sheriff's Department as a recovery team. And we were called into a couple of places around New York State as a recovery team.
In those days, quite a few people were diving on Lake Champlain, including some of our Canadian friends. And you and I cried when we saw a lot of the very important artifacts going north across the border for scrap.
Yep.
That was sad.
I was upset because I called the border and they said it was a load of junk going across.
Yeah.
There was a cannon, an anchor, some muskets, and all the stuff was going over as junk. So anything from that point on that I found underwater, I recovered. It might not be archaeologically proper, but I recovered it. Because if I could find it, somebody else could find it, and maybe they wouldn't be as honest as I was. Anything I found went into a museum, with the exception of 2 cannonballs.
And in those days, there was less regulation, but because of what you were doing, because of some other things that happened that we'll get to in a minute, a lot of these regulations were firmed up, and now it's a little more straightforward about what you do, what you have to do when you find something in Lake Champlain.
Another side story. 2 of the guys that I dove with and taught diving to have a great collection from around Crab Island. And I mean, these guys are dedicated divers. They will get down and they'll take an area the size of this table, and they will examine it with a microscope. They've got little buttons like this with the anchors on them. They got little buttons with the British flag on them. They got a variety of things. And I knew of this collection. So I talked to them. I said, you know, boys, it's great. You guys got a number of things at home. I said, but only you can appreciate them. I said, why don't you bring them down to Battle of Plattsburgh and see if they can't work something out. Because true, it's against the law to have them. And that's a story that goes back to the cannons on Cliff Haven. But New York State Museum, with a new director under Governor Spitzer, who was a very strong on enforcement. When the new director found out the Battle of Plattsburgh, says, look, we've got these artifacts that we just donated to us. The new director says, let's prosecute them, we'll throw them in jail. Well, you can't, it's almost impossible to enforce and legislate divers. You have to work on a diver's honesty. The divers found something, they like to share it with somebody. Not if it's under the threat of prosecution. Well, as things turned out, we've got a new governor and things kind of eased off a little bit. And the director of the museum, I'm not sure what her move was, but nonetheless, the prosecution never took place. The artifacts are displayed down at Battle of Plattsburgh Association. And these divers, I've given them some locations to look at that could prove to be very interesting in the future. But to try to say, we're going to put you in jail if you're diving, if you recover anything from the lake, there's too many divers and not enough enforcement with enough serious things to deal with other than this.
Can you imagine, based on what we've told you, friends, watching this program wherever you are in the comfort of your home or office, can you imagine how much history sank to the bottom of Lake Champlain since the early Native American days? Only a very tiny fraction has been recovered. And, you know, it's this, when they call it underwater archaeology, it's very interesting what's going on down there at Valcour.
Yes. Now that's a proper underwater archaeological site.
Exactly.
And Ed Scallon and his crew.
What a bunch of guys, huh?
Good men, did it right. They got a grid underwater, they did the whole thing. What you got to realize, well, you know, I took you diving back in the 60s out at the breakwater.
How well I remember.
Here we sit looking at this beautiful expanse of nature. Imagine if your field of vision extended as far as where Calvin is, or where that tree is.
Oh, boy.
And a foot the other side of that tree lies a gunboat, but you can't see it.
Yeah, that's Lake Champlain.
So you're out there looking with a microscope where you should have a wide-angle unit. It's
very difficult, but we have, technology gets better and better.
Yes.
And, you know, if we can find a Titanic, and I continue to read more, there's in a recent Newsweek magazine, another great article on why the Titanic sank. If we can recover things like the Titanic, more of this stuff will be discovered.
Yeah.
Some of the earliest conversations Frank and I ever had were about location, he thought the location of some of the ships from way back when in Lake Champlain. One off Valcour, between Valcour and what's that little island there?
Oh, Gardner Island.
Gardner Island.
French payroll ship.
The French payroll ship. Just explain a little bit to our viewers what that was. I was so excited, I paced my house for days and days and days, hoping that some way you could dive on it, and maybe I could be there.
I spent probably 100 tanks of air diving for it. I've got we recovered a pewter plate, some pipes, clay pipes, a couple of buttons, and the buttons come up with a magnetic magnetic sensor off the island. 1751, French dominated Lake Champlain. A payroll ship heading for Fort Carillon with 50,000 gold louis
Wow.
ran aground on a reef. It hit a reef off of Gardner Island, and that's the little island that's just south of Valcour. And as a reef extends almost a mile off that island, south. The boat headed for that island and ran aground on that reef and sunk. They sent a longboat down to Fort Carillon to tell them what had happened to their boat, and they left a contingent of men on the island. They took parts of the hull and a cabin and built a little blockhouse on the island, and the foundation of the pit that was there is still on the island. We found 2 uniform buttons in that pit. Their swimmers got 10,000 gold pieces off the boat before the chill of winter
Now,
ended their search.
imagine what it was like to dive on a wreck in those days.
With no wetsuit.
Yeah, we're talking down how many feet?
Tough men, tough men.
Can you imagine?
Well, it was aground, so it was a matter of just getting in the cold water and trying to recover.
That's bad enough.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway,
They spent the winter on the island. The following spring, Lake Champlain has its annual rise, and the vessel is locked in the ice. The lake starts to rise. The block of ice and the vessel drifts slowly away, and once it's unsupported, the ice weakens and the vessel slides beneath the waves. Somewhere, probably north of Gardner Island, north and east of Gardner Island. You got 200 feet of water there, some places, and it's. We've been down 110 feet looking for it, and
that was so exciting. You and I talked about chartering planes to hover over and take pictures. Oh my goodness!
Remember when I took you down to Ausable Chasm?
I was going to bring that up, but I knew you would, Frank. So tell me, what was that was all about?
Back in the 40s, Payson Hatch, Hudson Hagland, John Keel, a group of men assembled to open a maritime museum. Hagland had salvaged the wreck of the Philadelphia, and he had also salvaged the Royal Savage.
Right.
So they also recovered 3 other boats, and these other boats were on trailers. The museum was going to be at Ausable Chasm, where the campground currently sits, and they had built a shed over it. But I guess it was '63 that I took you down there. The shed had collapsed, the boats were ruins, and we had just pawed around in the bilge and come up with some grape shot out of one of them. One of the boats was the Steamer Vermont, the first successful commercial steamboat in the world.
I don't think a lot of people know that.
Yeah.
I want to stop for just a minute and continue that story because it's a great story. We'll pause just a moment. All right, we stop for a moment to take a deep breath and collect our thoughts and spill a little more coffee. We're talking about people who are watching this program for the first time saying, wow, there, Mud, come on in, the kids get in here, this is history. People had no idea what that boat was. I had no idea what the Vermont was until you told me back in the early 60s. Tell me about that again. Now, this was the first
successful commercial steamboat in the country.
I tell people that story today and they look at me like I got 7 heads.
No, it started here on Lake Champlain, and Robert Fulton had the Claremont, but the Claremont never made a nickel. The Vermont hauled passengers, cattle, freight up and down Lake Champlain, and it was the main source of getting north and south for a number of years.
They had some interesting steamboat races and tugboat races, and what a shame it was to see that thing go into rack and ruin.
Yes.
After some very ambitious plans to preserve it and show it off to the public.
It was tragic because, if you recall, I went to the people at Ausable Chasm and said, you've got these 3 historic wrecks there. Please preserve them.
Yeah.
And they wound up under the bulldozer.
One more time, when Frank Pabst was just one step ahead of the crowd, as I said early in this program. But it breaks your heart.
Yeah, it does. It's because once history is destroyed, you can't replace it. I had, matter of fact, when I had the marina down at Valcour, part of the marina is at the mouth of the Salmon River. We found this log, a turbine, out in the mouth of the Salmon River. and it had square oak pegs that would drive a square linked chain. It had a bearing cap on either end, so it rode in a bearing, and it had fins on the other side. So evidently this sat in a sluice, and the water passing over these fins would develop much more RPM than a water wheel would. And it drove some sort of a mill up in the Salmon River.
Isn't that interesting?
So we found this, and we had the little museum on Miller Street, and when the city decided that they wanted the museum back, we had no place to put it. So I took it over to the Kent Lloyd House, only to find out a few years later they thought it was scrap and they burned it. But
oh, you're killing me. I did not know that. Frank.
Yeah, it's
oh,
here is the only
God.
surviving example of a turbine-powered mill, and it goes up in smoke.
Those are the people that should be prosecuted.
Well,
forgive me. I mean, this kills me.
Parallel situation before our museums were in existence. When the D&H Railroad sold the railroad station, they had a freight elevator that would take a ton of freight from the track level up to the road level.
Right.
And it was powered by water. It had a piston that was probably 2.5 feet in diameter, and it had a stroke of about 4 feet, maybe 5 feet. And there was a set of wheels that ran on a rail and a sprocket with a chain. And when it was completely relaxed, the freight elevator was on the ground floor. You put your freight in it, you closed the drain valve, you opened the flow valve, and water pressure, roughly 40 pounds a square inch, thereabouts, would fill this cylinder and push the piston out. And when it pushed it out, it tightened the chain and raised that elevator one floor.
I love it.
So I was commissioned to remove it from the building. I said, God, what a piece of machinery. I can't destroy this. And I tried for about 3 months to find a home for it. And nobody was interested. But what a piece of engineering that I don't think any examples of my limited experience, I don't know of any examples existing from.
Isn't that? And so it's gone now?
Yep.
Oh, sad. Before we start talking about books, and we got half an hour left in our show, I want to explain, it's a subject that you started to talk about, and these are the two cannon that were brought up in Lake Champlain. I'm excited because I was there.
That's right.
Recording the whole thing on the radio. Just briefly tell us that story.
Back in the 60s, my scuba club, the Lake Champlain Rec Raiders, wanted to make sure that young people that were getting involved in the sport would have a way to go, a way to learn. So we started a junior club for snorkelers. We had a number of young lads from Cliff Haven, the McKees, the Munns, and they were snorkeling with us. We would take them on snorkeling excursions over to the island where there was something shallow that they could see. Well, they were snorkeling out in front of Cliff Haven and chasing this old sheep's head around, and the one lad sees something on the bottom, and they called us up and they said, "We've found a cannon." I said, "Well, I've checked out any number of cannon stories. They were usually a sewer pipe or a tree trunk that was hollow." And I sent John Weisner down, and John went down and came back. He said, "They do indeed have a cannon." We went down with my little barge. It was kind of a makeshift affair out of two fuel tanks from a KC-97
oh, yeah.
that had clobbered in a few years earlier. And
oh, yeah.
we winched the cannon up, put them in my boat, and coincidentally, the Hotel Witherell was going on the auction block that weekend. The auctioneer, Van Valkenburg, came down to see the cannon, because it was all over town. Boy, these big cannons have been found. I had asked the kids, I said, "Look," I said, "we've had this museum on Miller Street at the time." I said, "Can we bring the cannons to the museum and store them there temporarily?" "Sure, no problem." Well, the conversation down at Peru Dock, where we're unloading the cannons to the back of my truck, was these cannons are worth money. They'll sell for thousands of dollars. And the parents of the kids, their eyes were going like a cash register at Walmart. So I called Dr. Alan Everest up, and I asked him, as a employee of New York State and a agent for history in the area. Would you receive these cannons and hold them until their disposition can be decided? He agreed to do so. Before I could move the cannons down to the state museum, state college, the parents had hired somebody else with a truck. They backed up to my truck on my property, took the cannons out of the truck. My guys want to go out there with weight belts and break heads. I said, no, let's not do it. The law's on our side. Anyway, 18 years later.
18 years later.
These cannons for 18 years could have been in a museum where the kids could have seen and appreciated what took place here.
Yep.
18 years later, they show up at Sotheby's. The state awards the kids $45,000 for storing the cannons for 18 years.
Think about it.
I got bupkis for salvaging them. I didn't want any money for salvaging. I want them to go in the museum. Upside of it is that further diving in that area, we about 15 muskets were brought up. A 2-pound swivel gun that had been stopped and spiked. That is in the Clinton County Historical Society Museum.
And our cameras have seen it on numerous occasions.
Yep. Interesting point. The ball charge was intact and dry.
Think about it.
They had spiked the powder hole and put a wooden plug in the muzzle. We took the plug out, the ball rolled out, and the wadding, and then the charge was in a piece of animal intestine. They'd pre-measured the powder into this animal intestine, knotted at either end, and they didn't have to take time then to measure. They just took the pouch, threw it in, pierced it, put the fuse in, and fired.
Think about touching history.
Yeah.
You mentioned before touching a cannonball. Wasn't that something?
Yes, it was. I'm proud and pleased. That was in the museum from day one.
So where are those 2 cannons from Cliff Haven right now?
One of them is up at Clinton Community College. The other one is down at the Interpretive Center in Crown Point.
Okay, just so people know.
Yeah.
And that controversy raged for
It was awful.
For
It
years
was
and
awful.
years
It
and years.
polarized the
It did.
community.
It really did, and how sad that was.
Yeah.
Now, the time we have left, let's talk about, we've always believed, Calvin and I are of one mind, when it comes to believing that we somehow have to chronicle these wonderful stories. Everybody's got a story. Frank's got 3,000 of them. We've only touched on a few today. But you decided it was important to start writing some of this stuff down. So you got together on this project. What year did this start?
Probably around 2001 I started the book. And
That's 7 years ago.
Yeah, there's not much. It's not a lot of pages. But what's in it is interesting, to me anyway, and many people that have read it have complimented me on it. We know that these cannons were found. We know they're from the French ships. How did they get there? I took a fictitious character and put them into the scene as to what happened the day that those cannons went over the side. What happened when the exploded cannon at Valcour blew up and killed the cannon crew? What happened on the Confiance when that anchor went over the side? What was the mood of the people? How did the battle go? So we were able to put it into a more human situation. There's a beginning and an end to it. And there's a couple other stories I'm rolling around that I'd like to put a beginning and an end to. I'm in the process of starting off Juniper Nights, and it's not going to be told in its entirety, but what will be told in Juniper Nights will be a lot of fun.
So this one you finally finished and
Yes.
published it in what year? A couple years ago?
Yeah, a couple of years ago. I don't remember what year we went out with it, but it has paid for itself. I self-published it, steadily printed it, and we've sold enough of it that we're ahead of the game.
Dedicated to my wife Ann and all the divers and supporters who made it happen.
That's the bottom line.
It's a wonderful story. It's fun reading. You got a lot of great pictures in here, and hopefully it'll sell a few copies and continue to sell more copies, right?
I sure hope so. I've probably got about 300 left and I'm done.
I love it.
Then I'll write another one.
I love it. All right, fast forward to our good friend Wayne. You call him B-A-A. I always call him B-A. I don't know how to truly pronounce his name. It's B-E-Y-A-A.
B-E-Y-A-A.
He was a state trooper when I first met him.
Yeah.
In this area. Interesting guy. Another guy who always had an opinion about things, but he's always had a good knack for
Yep.
writing.
Yes.
And so,
I met him. My son went up to get his boat. His boat was disabled, And my son said, Dad, this guy Wayne B.A. wants to talk to you. I said, all right. So I gave Wayne a call, and we sat down over a cup of coffee, and following meetings were either coffee or a martini and a Manhattan or both. And he was probing into just how I got to be doing what I'm doing, why, when, what was the background. And as an inspector for New York State Police, he was a top shelf inspector, and he had 3 books that he had already published. I read all 3 of them, and I was fascinated with his writing skills and ability, how he could put a story together, and it was held your attention right up to the last word. So he says, I'd like to write a book about you. I said, oh my God. I said, all right, if you think there's enough material there to do, by all means. So we started in a long process that was interrupted somewhat by his moving down to Georgia. Thanks to the blessings of the internet and email, of which many, many emails were exchanged, we filled out the story. I had a pocket tape recorder, and I'd record a bunch and send it down to him, and he sent me back an email asking questions at various points in the recording. And I kind of, after he got down to Georgia, I figured, well, his interest will be off to something else. He's no longer up in the North Country. We still communicated. I get emails from him every day. But I hadn't thought too much about the book. And I get an email back about a month ago. Well, I got news for you. We got an agent, we got a publisher, and the book has been published. And I was shocked, absolutely shocked. He titled it, The Captain of the Juniper. And it starts with my early days and goes up through my life, and some of the hurdles that I've crossed and some of the things that beat me down, and on through to just about present time. And again, I like Wayne because things weren't gray, they were black or white. He called it the way he sees it, and I appreciated that no end.
Well, that's the story of your life. Just to show people, it's a pretty thick manuscript. I don't know how many pages, but
Wayne said he could have double the pages if I didn't edit some of it out.
It's a good size book. It's we're doing this in October 2008. The book is published. You don't have a finished copy of it yet.
Wayne is bringing them up. We got a book signing on October 18th, another one at the Cornerstone bookstore, then October 19th at Queensbury, and he's talking about Barnes & Noble over in Burlington, and another one in Swanton. There's a couple of bookstores down in Saranac Lake and Lake Placid I'm going to go visit.
So most of these signings and public appearances will have happened by the time this program is aired on Hometown Cable and elsewhere on the internet. But chances are the book will still be available at many different places. I don't know if you'll have a supply or if Wayne will be selling them out of his house or the publisher will.
Well, it's an interesting concept. When I published Cannons and Anchors, I put an order in for X number of books. And I did what was economically feasible. Wayne's publisher publishes on demand. So
it's an interesting and fairly modern concept.
Very interesting, because previously, if you had written a book, you'd go to a publisher and, okay, we're going to publish 50,000 copies, and it's going to cost X number of dollars to publish 50,000 copies. But the book isn't interesting, so you got 49,900 copies left.
Yeah.
With this, if a bookstore wants to get 10 copies, they'll register with this iUniverse.
iUniverse it is.
And they will print 10 copies and ship them to them.
Yep.
So the store then doesn't have to maintain a large inventory. They can reorder as the inventory depletes. And right now, the only one in Plattsburgh that's got it is the Cornerstone bookstore.
And Nancy Donahoe is such a great gal.
Oh, she's
in terms
terrific.
of helping to preserve the history and selling.
Yep.
I think it's tens of thousands of books that she has in there. It just boggles your mind when you walk in there.
Did you ever want to think of trying to do an inventory?
Oh no, I wouldn't even. Any more than I would like to look in my cubby holes and nooks and crannies, as my mother used to call them, in my own house to do an inventory. And Calvin's place is even wilder than mine. Can you imagine all these tens of thousands of programs that he's done since the early 1980s? Hopefully these things will all be cataloged and archived, and that all three of us will live long enough to see that happen. And I got to tell you that it pleases me that you and Wayne met up,
Yes.
so that he was able to get this story together and write this book. You've read, this is the finished manuscript exactly as it is in the book?
I'll let you know after I read the book.
Oh, okay. So
I think so. I read it, edited it, and I loved it.
What, is it soft cover?
Soft cover or hardcover, either way you want.
Okay. A couple hundred pages maybe or less?
Yeah, I think it's like 200 to 300 pages, somewhere in that neighborhood.
You don't know what the cover illustration is going to be?
No,
The world may know it by the time they see this program. But
when Wayne and I were talking about it, we were talking about title. I said, "Oh, the title I'd like to see is The Last Buffalo," because
oh yeah,
they're, in this day and age, it's so difficult for anybody to get started. You've got to play Mother May I with so many different agencies. I was at a meeting at the Historical Society where John Clute did a superb presentation on history and law. And he basically was talking about my old property down at the railroad yard. And for 25 years I was there. Taxes were paid on it. We moved commerce through there. We hauled freight. We did a variety of things.
Yep.
In 1852, 4 guys got together, like you, me, Calvin, and somebody else, and said, let's start a railroad. And they started a railroad. They didn't have to get a permit. They didn't have to get permission. They didn't have to get a license. They started a railroad, which turned into the D&H Railroad, which turned into a connecting line between Montreal and New York City. Nowadays, could you imagine us 4 or us 3 getting together and saying, let's start something? We wouldn't live long enough for the permits to come through.
You and I have started a few things, but that's another story entirely. But Wayne has told this story. There will be other books. I'm sure Wayne will keep writing. I'll keep writing. You'll keep writing. You think you have at least one more book in you. And what will that one be about, do you think?
That'll be Juniper Nights.
Juniper Nights.
And the other one I'd like to do is about the Lady in the Lake. I'd like to bring that to a conclusion.
That's another story we haven't even mentioned today. Chris Ortloff was involved in writing about that.
Yeah.
And you were involved because you were there.
Yeah.
And this is a story that has managed to pique the curiosity of millions of folks around the world. Such an interesting story that dates back to when? The 1920s?
Well, 1933.
1933?
Is when Mrs. Mabel Smith Douglas disappeared.
In what lake was it?
Lake Placid. And in 1963, we were diving off of Pulpit Rock, and Dick Niffnager and Jimmy Rogers finds what they thought was a department store mannequin. And upon grabbing the arm to bring it to the surface, let's scare the guys with this. They grabbed the arm and it come off, and they saw a bone and a ball in a socket and realized that it wasn't a mannequin. It was a real body, but it was totally and perfectly preserved.
Now, you have to explain that. You explained that to me way back when I first heard about it, and that's so interesting.
Well, what it was, the minerals and salts in the water of Lake Placid entered her tissue and preserved it. And she almost had like a wax-like exterior. Her internal organs were just as pink as if she'd have died 5 minutes earlier.
Wow.
When they did the autopsy. And she was the founder of Douglas University, which is a part of Rutgers now, down in New Jersey. And I believe that her remains have been removed down there to the university cemetery. But she was seen, a figure wearing a black dress and a hat with a veil was seen rowing her boat on Lake Placid. Workers from George and Bliss Boat Landing saw a figure row by. When all of a sudden they heard a splash, the boat is upside down, and she's not there. They rowed over, no sign of her. In 1963, when the boys find her, she's got a 50-pound horse anchor. This is like a dumbbell with a ring on it.
Right.
And you used to use it to tie a horse to when you stopped somewhere.
Oh, yes.
It's tied the distance from the fingertips to the elbow away from her neck. Plenty of rope laying down there, but it's tied that short. The state police findings was that it was a suicide. I disagreed with that. Here this lady was a wealthy lady. She never lifted anything heavier than a pencil. She was an educator. And for her to sit in that boat, she'd have to hold a 50-pound weight with one hand and manipulate knot tying with the other, or put the weight on the seat, kneel down in the boat, and tie it off. But there was plenty of rope. If she was committing suicide, the weight could have been down on the bottom of the boat, enough rope to reach her neck, tie it off, and go over the side with it. I believe that if you had a body to get rid of laying in the bottom of the boat, you tie it off the distance from your fingertips to your elbow and roll the boat over and kick out of the hat and the dress, and just a small distance underwater, people are looking at the boat. They're not going to see you over there.
What a story.
Yeah.
Now, we should mention that I said this story has piqued the interest of people around the globe. I'm not kidding, because some of the various networks have reiterated and regurgitated this story
Yeah.
over and over and over again.
Yeah.
People they interviewed are long since dead. Our friend from Osable Forks,
Mark Cross, yeah.
You know, long since expired, but this story gets told over and over again, and that shows how tremendously interesting this mystery is.
Oh, yeah.
And former Assemblyman Chris Ortloff wrote a story, a short story, right?
Lady of the Lake, and he did a great amount of research into the technicalities of it.
Yeah.
He did a great job.
Yeah. So here we are on October 10th, 2008, sitting on the lake
Shirt
shore
sleeves. Warm.
in our shirt sleeves, temperature in the 60s. We picked the perfect day to be here. I don't know why. I won't use the word reprobate for myself or for you. But I don't know why the good Lord shines down on us. By all that's good and holy, as my father used to say, we shouldn't have lasted this long.
That's a fact.
But here we are, two old fat guys telling stories about the olden days, and every word that you're hearing today is true. And because we only have a limited amount of tape in Calvin's machine over there, we've left out a lot of interesting points. But you know what? People can get the idea that this is one of the most colorful characters that ever set foot on this area, and I'll even include Samuel de Champlain, and that was 400 years ago. So, but the story of Frank Pabst and your wonderful wife Annie and your family, your trials and tribulations, your defeats and your triumphs, is the things that have happened to you and about you in your lifetime would be enough to beat down any normal person. But to call you normal would be not the correct definition, I don't think.
I appreciate that. And you know, what you and Calvin are doing, and I've said this at many meetings and many discussions with people, you're getting a video documentation of what took place in the North Country, what's taking place, and what might take place.
This is real history.
Yeah.
As we
But
sit here,
it's
this is
recorded
real history.
accurately.
Yeah.
The problem with history is that this person writes it, and this one interprets it, and this one rewrites it, and by the time it reaches over here, the actual meaning that it originally started off with has been changed.
Well, and the mistakes, very often the mistakes, as we know, have been perpetrated by people who go on the internet and read something that somebody wrote, and they continue to write the mistake.
They take
Somebody
it as
reads
fact.
what they read, continue to write the mistake. So a lot of what happened in history, you know, the origins is unknown. The origins are unknown because of misinterpretation, misunderstandings, and just flat out people who didn't do their homework.
But you know, you're talking about why are we still here? You do good things. I'm still doing a few good
of
things.
course
I run
you
the
are.
soup kitchen down at Trinity Church.
Oh, that's another wonderful thing.
And it's,
yes.
you know, just still helping the good Lord keep the earth together.
One of the there's an interesting landmark, Trinity Episcopal Church in downtown
Indeed.
Plattsburgh.
Yeah.
Battle of Plattsburgh Association and the committee working down there to make that Israel Greens tavern. And we had a wonderful roundtable discussion during the Battle of Plattsburgh time, but the soup kitchen is a good thing. Great history, and that's another one of my favorite programs, doing that tour of the Trinity Episcopal
Oh, that was
Church.
another great day.
Yeah.
And
So what are your plans? Have you got any specific plans for the next couple of years besides trying to get into another book?
Trying to figure how I'm going to pay for my fuel oil this winter.
Well, aren't we all? That's a
Yeah, I'm
consideration.
sure that's everybody's got that.
Well, you know, I hope by the time people see this for the last time, this terrible economical crisis in our country and the world is behind us, and we're making some progress. But we are, us poor folk here in the North Country, and I'm speaking for this triumvirate here, Frank and Calvin and myself, are sweating it out.
Yep.
Because we don't know what's going to happen.
No, my plans are kind of loose. I play around down the Port of Albany once in a while. If enough momentum is gathered to acquire this other boat, I'd love to see it happen.
What's the name of that again? I want people to go leave this program with that in their mind. Peckinpah?
Oh, the Day Peckinpah
Yeah.
is the one that's owned by the state.
Yeah.
The one I was referring to is the one in Schuylerville. It's for sale.
Oh, that one.
I'd
too.
love to see
Oh,
that
that
come
one
to
here.
Plattsburgh
Okay.
and do. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. Do what the Juniper did. It was successful. The problem is that, and when I tried to sell stock in the Juniper, I talked to Ed Smith, the man I respected. He had the Howard Johnsons
Right,
up,
right.
and he said you only got 2 months a season. He had money invested in the old Royal Savage line that Maynard Prey had. And you only got 2 months a season. You don't make enough. And really, we would reach a break-even point by the 15th of August. I had 2 weeks to make a profit.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
But here we are. Your mind will not stop. As they're putting
No.
us in the box, your mind, you'll be saying, hey, Gordy, this ain't so bad. Captain Frank Pabst, I want to thank you so much for your friendship. I shake your hand, my friend. You and Annie have been dear friends for a long time. You're a real stalwart. If there's anything we hope to leave people with in this interview, it is don't ever give up. People will do nasty things for you and to you, but there are other people who are with whom you've developed fast friendships, people in high places and low places with whom you have made a connection, who will always stand by you. And you never gave up.
No.
Frank, you never gave up. You may step back to take a look at the situation, but you never gave up, and I respect you for that.
When we burned out in 1984, I figured it was almost the end of the world for me.
Oh, I remember that sadly.
And I went down and I talked with Herb Carpenter, who also had his share of ups and downs. And he encouraged me and he gave me confidence, and I said a few prayers over it, and you know, we're managed to come back bigger and better than we were.
Yep. And here we are. And I thank you again for doing this. I thank our viewers for watching this program, for giving us suggestions. We got far more good ideas than we have time to go out and record these programs. But I think the rest of 2008, 2009, and beyond will bring great new things for Calvin and Hometown Cable and for us. And by osmosis, I hope it's a great, great year for you and Annie as well in the coming year. And I wish you the very best.
Gordy, I thank you, and I wish you blessings and best to you and Kay and your whole family.
And our whole giant
family.
Thank you all for watching. Don't forget your monetary contributions. Send those checks to Hometown Cable and Calvin Cast Iron in Champlain. It's very important that he receive enough of your contributions, your generous contributions, to keep that camera rolling, because we think it's important what we're doing, and we hope we can prove that over the next few years. And who knows, look at this day, who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.